All right, it looks like just about everyone is in. Again, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Lauren Jankowski, the Director of Marketing at GlideFast, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, Accelerating Change, How Technology Empowered Tennessee Social Services to Speed and Exceed Citizen Expectations. Before we get started, I'd like to give you some background information on GlideFast. GlideFast is a consulting firm that is dedicated exclusively to ServiceNow. As an Elite ServiceNow Partner, our expert team of developers and architects have worked on both sides of the table, the customer side and the consulting side. Our company was founded by ServiceNow architects, and we're proud to have a team of over 300 experienced consultants, an average CSAT score of a 4.8 out of 5, and many more accolades, as you can see here. I'm excited to introduce today's presenter to all of you. We have Landon Cook, the Director of Strategy at GlideFast Consulting. Landon has over 11 years of public sector experience, 5 years of State Department leadership experience. He has been implementing and working on ServiceNow for over 4 years, and he has also been a 3-time customer of GlideFast, and we were lucky enough to get Landon on the GlideFast team this year. I'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout today's session, so please send in any questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to answer them. Landon, you can take it from here.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Lauren. Good to meet everyone. I'm never sure at this hour whether to say good morning or good afternoon, so I'll say hello to everyone. Before we kick off into this proper, we've got up to the top of the hour to go through a whole lot of content. If you all had a chance to read the description, you know we're going to try to cover about 10 to 12 years of things that have occurred in for the Tennessee Department of Human Services and part of its enterprise modernization story. So there are 3 main takeaways I hope to leave you all with by the end of this session. One is what to do, and probably a good bit about what not to do when you're modernizing an enterprise. The second would be how technology shapes government culture and citizen experiences. This is something I think is very important to include in pretty much every conversation about technology, especially in the government space. And the last is, I guess, the reason to be picky, why there's such a critical impact of selecting technologies that's scalable with a partner that understands the software and knows how to be very agile. So before we get into story time, I do want to introduce the organization we're going to be talking about today. This is the Tennessee Department of Human Services, and it is one of 47 agencies in Tennessee state government. It's certainly the largest part of the state's social service industry. It manages and administers food assistance program, child care assistance program, child support enforcement, rehabilitative services for people with disabilities, and tremendously more than that, but that would probably be the big fish of this agency. As a result of its types of programs, its customer base varies broadly. So we're talking about families seeking help with food and parents who are seeking to establish co-support for children. But we're also talking local business owners, small business owners and large business owners alike, as well as individuals with disabilities seeking to gain employment skills, and many more than that. So we're talking a very broad spectrum of a customer base. And just to give everyone a little bit of the numbers, I guess, the perspective on the size and scope of this department. They serve some 2 million customers in Tennessee and have somewhere around the range of 4,000 employees, with about half of those directly communicating with external customers on a regular basis. And they are also about 93% federally funded with the programs they administer. This means they're pretty well saturated with rules and regulations and a lot of administrative responsibilities and federal oversight. I feel like that context is important to set the stage for how that kind of context starts to create a culture that we're going to see in a little bit of a before and after period. Lastly, I need to say 2 other things. As Lauren mentioned, basically, this is the other place I've worked in my career. I spent 11 years there, 11 really, really fast and good years there. Personally, I did everything from case management and training to data analysis and customer service director. So it was definitely a journey that I'm still very close to and is very near and dear to my heart. I have to add a disclaimer before we dive in. There may be some times that I still say we or us or our in reference to the Tennessee Department of Human Services. It's still something I don't know if I've ever really officially left the department. So I'll try to keep that clear for everyone, but sometimes I may say we, and I'll be referring to my own work at the Tennessee Department of Human Services. Okay, so let's get started. If you all read the description of the webinar, this is about how TDHS became an organization that was able to respond to emergency, basically crisis situations as phenomenally well as they did last year and have in many years recently that we won't even have time to highlight today. But I wanted to say it was really impressive for TDHS to become the one to beat. Last year was a very tough year, especially so for government. At a time when so many state and local government entities were under such intense and extended scrutiny, TDHS, on the other hand, was receiving quite a lot of local praise and national attention, even in some ways, for their heroic efforts to rapidly support citizens in one of the most urgent times of need, right as COVID was emerging as something that people were going to have to respond to. But on that slide, I selected the word becoming very, very intentionally because it wasn't always this way. This is something that took years and years to become the best like they are. So I want to talk to you, I want to set a little bit of a before and after comparison, talking more in depth about two very different systems implementations and how those implementations and the effort taken behind it and the technology they worked with, how that impacted their ability to respond to two very different crises. So hopefully that's going to help us set the frame for what things need to occur to become a modernized enterprise and how things like that unlock different types of potential and the ability and agility to respond to emergency situations. So it's hard to say exactly when, we'll give the range of about 10 years ago. There was a systems modernization initiative designed around eligibility determination that was on a platform called VIP. And this was a systems implementation that ended up going about 3 years over schedule. It was originally scheduled for 4 years, and it ended up lasting for 7 years, at the end of which did not actually result in technology changes. Pretty much all of the work that went into that effort that wasn't designed around process and structural design, the technology changes, none of them were kept. And this was, I don't need to spend a whole lot of time here. I think anybody who's spent time in any systems implementation work knows that was a very, very painful point in the department's history. And this is obviously something that forced leadership to go back and recalibrate and reevaluate how they went about this, what could have possibly gone and led them in the direction that it resulted in no technology changes. It was something that started to get a lot of attention from the media and the public once it eventually was scrapped, because we are talking, many millions that went into funding this project. And I wanted to talk about the experience and the impact of that modernization initiative. At the time, most case managers, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, most case managers were still using DOS interfaces. We're talking the early 2010s when the decision was made not to proceed with that implementation. And by that point, many systems and several programs, especially the program this was focused on, it was about 20 years old, the system that people were using. So early 90s design, or at least basis of early 90s design. And we're talking a mainframe legacy system. As a result, pretty much trying to do anything there meant that it was highly manual. The only automation was basically to figure out how to write your own macro and code. And that's hard to operate under. And any kinds of case actions like escalations, a confidential caseload, these actions require deep institutional knowledge. So at that time, the only way to start getting support internally was in the system. Is if you didn't need the system to do that one thing, you had to take it out of the system and you had to be the source that knew how to get everything taken care of. It was not anything that prompted or managed the entire process end to end on its own. The last two bullets on this slide, I wanted to make sure to bold because I firmly believe this was the greatest impact of the original technology initiative. The fact that no supportive technology came out of that effort meant that the culture started to stifle. At the time, there was a lot of grumbling about the idea that nothing would ever change and that these were going to be the systems that staff would have to use forever. And, they would just have to figure it out. And as a result of how old these systems were, training for some of these positions was about 3 months. And a lot of it was focused around system processes and had to spend 3 months plus learning how to use the system. With a system that outdated, of course, there's no interaction with customers. So customers had no control over their cases. So pretty much any action on an application or their case management meant it had to go through a person every single time. And this stayed through through most of the 2010s. But that cultural impact and the customer's reaction to this and the customers feeling absolutely powerless to be able to manage their eligibility, those have serious cultural impacts on both staff and employees. I wanted to make sure to mention that with a pretty strong degree of severity here, because that's something that's going to come up a good bit later on. This cultural impact remained for the better part of a decade. So this is about the early 2010s, and something else was happening in the department at this same time. New administration had come in and started to look at how the agency operated as a whole, and less on technology and more on, the best way I can describe it is philosophy. This administration wanted to transform the department into, the easiest way to say it is focusing on hand-ups instead of handouts. Now, it's oversimplified, but they introduced several new ideas that were specifically designed to help the customer base of DHS have outcomes that were built around self-sufficiency and independence. And one example of these that I think is the most prominent is something called 2Gen, or it's also called the two-generational approach. The approach here was designed to focus on both the child and the parent. Statistically, children born in poverty are more likely to also experience poverty as adults and raise their own children in poverty. And so that creates these cycles, these vicious continual cycles of generation after generation of poverty. The department, with such a massive footprint on social services in the state, this administration came in and started to say, okay, instead of focusing on just efficiently handing out benefits or administering benefits, we have to start driving at superior outcomes that help people get out of poverty. So yes, handle things like help with healthcare, help with food assistance programs, childcare, but also include job training and skills acquisition that helps people retain and gain employment ongoing. And it was quite transformative for the agency. And it came at a very important time. This relates to the technology because this approach culturally and philosophically was about to force the agency to observe its own technological capabilities and see where its own ceiling is. And that was about to get put right in the department's faces with a what I call a perfect storm of a crisis that occurred in late 2015 and throughout 2016. So in about that time frame, late 2015, the department, as part of this philosophy, was realizing that a lot of staff were managing still very administrative responsibilities. I think I remember seeing a study that nationally something like 59% of social services workers spent an average of 59% of the time in their day on administrative tasks, which is very steep. At the end of 2015, the department was going through a large-scale buyout of staff, and it led to the early retirement of many staff, most of whom worked in some sort of a customer service role. That was probably, I believe that was the majority. This was followed by an agency-wide hiring freeze in 2016, and both of those things were fine. Of course, the department studies how to address these and make sure it can still serve and meet its requirements to serve people. But what was almost impossible to predict was that the state entered a sudden but severe economic recession about this time. If anybody's visited Nashville recently, this was before Nashville became what it is today. And so with that cap on staff and their ability to, or how many were available to serve, followed by a sudden massive influx of customer need, our service delivery plummeted to the timeframes you see on the screen. So our peak wait on the phones was about 2 hours. Our lobby peak wait was averaging at a little over an hour. I'll note here is this is also about the time that we realized how hard it was to measure actual lobby queues. So we were at this time in the middle of this crisis having to assess how we were measuring everything. For one of the customer service units, the average response time was 1.5 days or 36 hours. And the ability for chat to support this volume it plummeted. Again, chat was originally designed for something else within the department. And when that amount flooded in through all these channels, it changed how every one of these channels could serve constituents. It was very much a surprise and very much a difficult one to respond to. You can see on the right side how that impacted our volume of complaints and inquiries year by year over that annual cycle. It was about a 275% increase in complaints. With this kind of a crisis on hand, of course, everybody jumps in and tries to figure out how to solve things. But this is always one I like to show in the story, because this is what I thought would be a good solution. When people are confronted with a challenge or a problem like this, they're only able to solve problems with the tools that they have available and understand. And at the time, most work still in the department was done through spreadsheets, or anything else in the basic Office suite of products, and Google Suite products, both of which are not at face value designed for large-scale CRM or CSM management. And the short story version of this is when personally I had put something out there that I thought would help solve this, and it was received positively, and I realized it was just a massive spreadsheet. Me personally, this was my wake-up moment to say, like, there's no way this can manage customer service in a time of crisis for a department that serves 2 million customers on a normal year, let alone in a recession. This is about the time that many in the department were beginning to acknowledge the lack of tech capability and knowledge that the department had. Basically, the department was finding its ceiling of technological capability. And I'd like to recall that this is still at the time when the department is focusing on self-sufficiency and transitioning to independence outcomes, rather than just administer the benefits, just send the benefits. At this point, with those kinds of wait times, how could the department have ever served people and supported them being able to work in a regular job if the wait times weren't even something that people could manage over the course of a lunch break, even on phone call? And this is about the time the department was talking more to the state's IT department called STS. DHS and STS talked and started to explore the marketplace to better understand how the available software can start to address these underlying problems. This is when many of us first discovered what CSM was, got an understanding of what a workflow was. I say that personally because I didn't understand that term for quite a while. And the true trigger of starting to visualize a different future through technology was to start to understand why platform-based applications were an absolute necessity for the future of the department. So this shows just a little bit of the statistical analysis of what some of the costs were that the department was determining that it was having to pay for just in order to delay some sort of service. So in this example, I'll go kind of quickly through this. Over the course of one annual cycle, one call center received 70,000 calls at an average wait time of an hour for that year when it got really bad. At 2 cents per minute, the department was looking at about an $84,000 expense. But there's more to it than just this. I'd like to say that cost is not the biggest number anybody's ever seen in government, but that was one call center, 1 year for one program. So this is something that was starting to be assessed as a systemic problem across the agency. Additionally, if you're looking at the second to left box, this is something that I think is critically important in this use case. A lot of customers of DHS, a lot of those customers are people in poverty. And especially at this time, it wasn't always that people in poverty had access to phone plans that had unlimited minutes. And can you just imagine for a second having 200 minutes per month granted to you to try to navigate and, crawl further into some sort of state of self-sufficiency? Imagine you may need to spend 60 to 80 of those just to tell your case manager that your address changed. I don't think that can be understated how this is when we started to realize that the available technology was something that was hindering the department's ability to achieve its new mission. So this is when the rubber started to hit the road. And during that time period of that perfect storm I was describing earlier, it lasted, in some places, it lasted through most of 2016, those wait times. And over that time, for about 2 years, TDHS and STFs were understanding who they were going to go forward with for customer service management. And after about 2 years of that, it was determined that ServiceNow CSM was going to be the one they were going to start the journey with ServiceNow CSM and get help from GlideFast. And this is the statistic that I get such a kick out of this. It took 2 years everybody's heard hurry up and wait. This is like wait and hurry up. It took 2 years to understand the marketplace because, again, CSM was a little less common at that time in government than it is now. At the culmination of those 2 years, the team and I was granted 6 weeks to stand this up with GlideFast. So I get tickled by that because it went off absolutely without a hitch. 6 weeks, stand up, workshopping, and with a pilot launch on October 2nd. You can see from this timeline that it may have spent 2 years to make the decision, but in 10 months, the amount of impact, even planned, that I think it grew beyond this over the course of those 10 months. It was very ambitious. And the department got to work aggressively in this space because on the tail end of this recession ending and the economic state of Tennessee starting to very rapidly improve, the department was determined to be ready the next time there was another crisis. I'll move on past this. The amount of impact the implementation had was something the department was able to realize within weeks. In 2 months, you're looking at some of the statistics measured before and after. The most obvious and prominent of these, which is the assignment timeliness statistics, because of even some of the most out-of-box, I guess I would say basic automation functionality offered at a base level by ServiceNow, those assignment timeliness, it went from 36 hours to like 8 minutes. And that was a staggering realization, along with just even the resolution timeliness. Things could move quicker because just even being able to automate work to people based on what the type of request was, send automated acknowledgements, it more than decimated the timeliness standards. It entered new measurement criteria. And, the approach with this implementation was markedly different than the modernization initiative that the department had seen sometime 10 years prior, where the purpose here was to find any possible use case, find a place to make a difference and go and do it and then deliver and make it very quick in an agile format, right? One of the other main targets to highlight, I won't go through every one of them, but was on the improvement of lobby queue management. By the time the lobbies were being approached with this, we're talking early 2018. And as I'd said earlier, some of those places still had struggled with those wait times. The initial influx of that perfect storm a few years prior had just completely changed their process, and it got so administrative and reporting heavy and had so many handoffs to check and make sure things were being done correctly. These were still some locations that were reaching 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour or more of lobby wait times. The other one I like to compare is if you're in one of the most challenging states of your life and you're needing to start asking for help from friends, family, the government, church, going and sitting in a DHS office for an hour is not the place that you want to be. That customer experience it goes from inconvenient to like a soul crushing over a course of the period of time. And with these improvements, you can just see right here, we were cutting lobby wait times an average of 85%, got the average wait time down to about 5 minutes. And these were things that we were seeing consistently at our locations where it was implemented, east to west Tennessee. So this is where I want to revisit a good bit what was different from before. This approach of start small and win big, it generated an incredible amount of momentum with both what was being done on the platform and with the partnership with GlideFast, and the ability to grow so rapidly and make long-term changes on each of these workflows. Leadership definitely turned their attention again to the technological impact that this platform can offer the department's ability to achieve its mission. And so, this is when the realization was really starting to settle in that only through improving the department's technology and using the technology to empower staff and customers, that was going to be the only way to achieve a transformational future for customers, to be able to transition into self-sufficiency. And over many months, the department initiated a revolution of service delivery. And, these are at the times that, you'd see normal conversation of some sort of enterprise modernization. People were talking about cross-agency workflows, data management, what levels of customer access. But the thing is, the work and the impact of the solution continued to expand. It continued to progress. So additional applications, additional functions, additional teams were being onboarded as work needed to be solved. This ability to continue the progress was very important, because that's one of the things that made it so different this time around. Something that the real difference between the original implementation effort we described at the beginning and this implementation, it boils down to 3 things, but I want to highlight the third in just a second. Right software, right partner. I think I've mentioned that several times. Having something that's scalable and people that know how to support an industry like state government. Those things are absolutely critically important. That decision has to be made at the point of purchase. But the change management approach was something that made this implementation a tremendous success. And it wasn't anything particularly complex or new. We've all talked about people, process, and technology, but it's how this department and its leadership went about executing on its approach to people, process, and technology that made this change. It turned the culture of the organization into a culture of change alongside technological innovation. So with people, they were focused on engaging staff and customers alike step after step throughout the implementation. Process, basically the mantra was, nothing is sacred unless it's federal. So I imagine my state government partners, peers on here, have all seen where the discovery of something that's been considered process, after further inspection, you only realize that it's just something that people have done for a very long time, and it's actually not based on any kind of rules or regulation. Process was a very important part of this. Technology was something that I thought was the management of introducing this new technology was, I think, the masterstroke of this agency. They made the technology as approachable as possible to maximize people's exposure to this and minimize people's fears. This included internally managed, purely just inside the department, proof of concepts, town hall meetings, demos, you name it. Any way this department and its leadership and its IT support could introduce people all across this state to what the change was that was coming and how to use the technology, they were doing it. I literally believe our leadership team visited, if they didn't, there are 95 counties in the state of Tennessee. I believe they launched a campaign to visit west to east, every single county location. If it wasn't every one, it was almost every single one. And as a result of these efforts and this continual iteration, when they were visiting, and I experienced this too, at the beginning of this, people would say things referring to that original implementation. And we're talking 10 years later. but it still continued to come up. People were saying, haven't you heard about VIP? Don't you know we've tried this before? Why would you try this again? You know how this is going to end. Let me tell you how this is going to end. Nothing's going to change. And those things were being said at the start because there was an incredible amount of residual cultural damage from that initial modernization attempt. But this new change management initiative, over time, it started very top down, but over time, it shifted to where the vocalization and the need and the demand for this change came from the field. It came from the people in local offices. And it's because the vocalization was coming from top level leadership, but also because the technology-based solutions, they were continuing to roll out, and people could not interact with the system at some point. They were all beginning to experience it and then experience what it could change. We saw complainers become champions. People started to see that when software like this, properly implemented from a good partner, starts to address the amount of quantity work that needs to be done, they don't have to worry about quantity survival as much, and they can start focusing on quality services. And that's when the realization that this technology, managing the more automated parts of my job, are going to enable me as a case manager, as a person who got a degree in social work. I can help people more directly. I can do something for them now instead of just manage the volume. It was absolutely instrumental and monumental, and the change is continuing. The TDHS is still in the middle of these, but with that cultural shift and that layer of technology now in place that is continuing to grow, this is what prepared the department to be ready for the next crisis. And the best example of this is the one that I mentioned, a reference at the beginning of the call, which was on the evening of March 2nd, morning of March 3rd, devastating tornadoes swept through Middle Tennessee. I don't know if anybody's seen Tennessee. For anybody who hasn't seen Tennessee on a map, it's like looks like a plank of wood, and tornadoes just went clean down the middle, exactly through the location of our capital, which is Nashville. 25 people were killed, 309 people were injured, and an estimated $1.5 billion in damages were done, including to Tennessee Department of Human Services local office in Nashville, which was and still is completely leveled. I mean, this was very extreme devastation. This is also occurring right at the time that the department was rapidly preparing to send people home and work from home and answer the questions of how can we support people remotely? How can we do our work remotely when so many things have been done in office and in person? Clearly a critical moment in the department's history that could have easily gone south in a moment's heartbeat. And this is something that GlideFast and the state they just killed it. They soared and solved this problem in what I'm told is under a week. I actually think it may have been like 72 hours. Basically configured an emergency food assistance program and created a portal and an access point that was available and connected to the existing caseload. It's like, we're not talking just a way for people to submit something and ask for help. This was something that was integrated with the actual case management experience and something that customers could access on their own hands at their own time when they would get access back to the internet after the tornadoes. Like, this was something this was a big win. Previously, and I participated in some of these, but previously the solution usually to emergency situations had been take all the bodies, find all these case managers, put a bunch of computers at a location close to where the impact was greatest, and then just keep the doors open all day, all weekend, just help people in that capacity. But of course, in COVID times, that's an impossibility. So this was I guess you'd say, the digital equivalent of that immediate emergency response. And this was something that received wide acclaim from people in government. I heard the governor's office had asked about this a lot. Other agencies asked about it, other states, citizens. You know, the best way to satisfy a citizen is to make sure they don't have to say a word to you about it. They don't need to complain. This was something that received national attention. And I think the department absolutely deserved that because they demonstrated incredible agility in emergency situations. This was made possible by the concept of composable service delivery, which is built around that top bullet point, if you see it there. The idea that as long as you have the platform in place, you can configure the solution off of the platform. Historically, the approach would have been, if there was some sort of specific digital solution that the state needed for this, the solution would have to be go buy something to solve this very, very quickly. But I like to think of this as Legos, because the difference here is they had all the parts. They had the platform in place. It was already layered throughout a lot of their service delivery. And they had a right partner who knew how to configure something very quickly, that there's one application then to solve that issue. And it's still, through the shared data model, it's still connected to the data existing in the other parts of the case management experience and other, since it's on the platform that's also layered throughout the agency. So you're not having, customers aren't having to tell the same story, or it's this one isolated, siloed experience. That rapid turnaround and the ability for this to be connected to other parts of the agency, this idea of composable service delivery absolutely transformed the department's ability to address emergency situations. So we've compared the implementations with these two crises in mind. I wanted to quickly show just a summary of what the differences are at a very base level. And if you'll note, I have these categorized as pre-modernization and during modernization. I'm not saying post-modernization yet. I don't think TDHS is saying that it's post-modernized yet, but it's impressive that even over the course of modernization, that tapping into the potential of the platform and the partner network has enabled them to respond and address needs so quickly. So pre-modernization, things were very expensive to buy, or if it was built in-house, you end up with things like I built, that horrible spreadsheet. And the toolkit is very limited, as opposed to afterwards, if you're used to something that's a platform level service, your toolkit is massive. I liken people's access to a very advanced software like ServiceNow. I liken it to a library card. Only through using those things are people going to start to discover what software can do for them. I have to repeat what I said earlier. People only can solve problems with the tools that they have available and understand. So access to that toolkit is massive. And culturally, the ability to make decisions very, very rapidly in an agile fashion in partnership with IT, this modernization effort is something that's enabling them to be very quick, responsive, and IT can engage its business side partners or program staff in these departments very quickly because they're speaking the same language through the same platform. I want to very, very quickly summarize, and then we'll move into the Q&A in a second. Hopefully, these examples in Tennessee's recent history, both from an implementation and a crisis management approach, help you understand how impactful technology has on government services and government culture. And I'd like to say that personally, I had a prime spot to watch every day as the department grew into this transformative citizen-focused agency that we see it as today over the course of just one decade. And really the majority of the work was done over the course of about, I'd say probably 4 to 5 years from leadership down, for them to go to such an organization that was so struggling with technology to becoming such a suave industry icon just in less than 10 years. It could not have been done without their support of technology and the partner network for them. The single greatest impact technology has is to change our culture. And TDHS, you can see that happening every day. This kind of growth, it's fostered a culture of change and a culture of trust. And I'm hard pressed continually to find people who are more passionate about just trying to serve citizens and serve duty to the taxpayer. They've really established themselves as leaders in state government, and they did that through technology and culture. Okay, let's move into our Q&A, and I'm going to figure out how to do that. Oh.
Great job, Landon. That was awesome, and I'm sure the audience has tons of questions. I can already see some coming in. So I'll just start reading them off to you. All right, first one. What was the hardest part of this journey?
Hardest part of the journey absolutely would be getting people to understand the why of all of this. Getting people to see that this kind of change was not just necessary, but imminent. It was by far the most challenging part of it. And that's why I like to say that the master stroke of leadership at the time was to recognize that and go out to these offices and make that change hands-on in person at each of these locations. Big changes like this, they can stir up a whole lot of fear. And the adoption started to exponentiate once this was starting to be addressed. It was the hardest part, but also certainly the single most rewarding part of this too.
Awesome. Here's another one. Did you try out any other systems or implementers?
We looked at a couple other platforms, with us so heavily emphasizing scalability and security and accessibility internally and externally. That's a main reason why ServiceNow is such a clear winner. I don't want to talk bad about any of the other ones we looked at. As far as implementers, I know we had and have. I guess the nicest way I can say this is there's a reason we went back to GlideFast so many times. It's a reason I looked for employment here after a while. Yeah, finding someone who can offer some sort of that level of expertise on a platform instead of just understanding software in a general perspective, while also not having being able to offer value and not having the price tag of what you'd normally have to pay for something that's specialized. It made the decision a lot easier for us, at least for me.
Awesome. And then we have one more question for you. If you had to take this journey all over again, what's one thing you would have done differently this time?
I'm thinking of two. Yeah, I have to do both. I think both of them are important. First is celebrating the small wins. I have a vivid memory of just before we were turning this into a department-wide initiative that we, my unit, the customer service team there, had won a Gold Stevie Award in customer service deliveries for something like a public department or public state department. It was cool. There was like an award ceremony somewhere and all this stuff, and they eventually sent it to us. When we got the trophy and all, I was like, oh, that's kind of nice, and like walked past. I wasn't trying to make a big deal out of it. And then several on the team saw it and insisted, like, we earned this. This took labor and work. And that was actually a very important formative moment for me personally, just to realize that these small wins had to be celebrated. And that's something the leadership, as other leadership got involved in this, they made really sure to start accommodating. The other would be, as the implementations proceeded, and I mentioned earlier that there were proofs of concepts and town hall meetings and other things like that to get the amount of change and software introduction to start to spread to more people. Those things were being stood up quite frequently about the end of 2018, 2019, and they were unbelievably effective. So personally, this was my own takeaway, not the department's as much. I wish I'd realized the importance of those earlier. Because that was a very, very effective tool that our IT staff and our leadership staff used to build incredible amounts of buy-in very, very rapidly in a short period of time.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think those were all the questions that came in. I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining today's webinar. And if you do have any more questions or want to talk to Landon, you could reach out to him at landon.cook@glidefast.com, or you could reach our company at info@glidefast.com. Landon, any last words?
I'm just going to reiterate what you said. If anybody has questions about this, we just covered 10 years of stuff in about 45 minutes. It's quite a lot to talk about. There's more to this that I'm always eager to share and help people understand from the government perspective why this is so critically important. So please reach out anytime. Happy to talk to anyone who has questions.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.